All right, hello, welcome. My name is Shaina. I'm an astrologer, and today we are continuing two different series. Look at me, I just love my little series. Ha ha ha. This is part of my Learn Astrology course 201. Oh, look at you, you're in 201. That's so cool. Thank you for being here and watching all these. But this is the second video in my 201 course, and it is part of my little, I don't even know what you'd call it. Detriment, domicile, exalted fall series. What is that term even called? That's so embarrassing.
Okay, so I looked it up and it's called essential dignity. I literally never knew that. I never ever knew that, but I'm so glad that I have a word for it now.
We did domicile in the last video, which I'll link right here if you didn't see. Basically, when planets are in their domicile, that just means that a sign is in its ruling planet. That's all it means. It's a fancy word, domicile, planetary ruler. So I would really recommend watching that video so you can get a vibe of why those signs rule those planets. Now today, we are talking about the opposite of domicile, which is detriment. What's interesting is I see a lot of times online, people know the word exalted, and sometimes they know the word fall, but a lot of people confuse placements in their detriment or domicile for just clumping it all into exalted or fall, and there is a big differentiation. So that's what I'm going to go over today. Also, if you're missed out on any videos on my Learn Astrology course, here's the link to the full playlist right here. All right, so before we get any further, let me just get the advertising out of the way. So I sell birth chart readings on my website, shainaemily.com. Thank you to everybody again that's purchased a reading. You guys are all so fun to talk to. You have no idea. I've been really enjoying getting to know a lot of you guys, and it's just been really cool. And then I have an astrology TikTok, which if you didn't know, I go live every Monday at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time, and I do mini readings. So if you want to chat with me or get a little mini reading by me, you can do that on my TikTok. And then I have a personal Instagram, which is really just a dog Instagram at this point. I really should just name it after my 4 pit bulls, you know? So let's go over a little bit of background information on what is a detriment placement. So as I mentioned, it's the opposite of domicile. Okay, so domicile is when a sign is in its home ruler, its ruling planet, right? For example, when the sun is in Leo, you have a domicile sun, which just means that the sun rules Leo, and that makes it its domicile. So detriment is, of course, the sign's opposition to that, right? Detriment is opposite to domicile, so that would just mean that the planet is in its opposite sign to what it rules. So for example, you would already know this if you watched my 12 zodiac signs video, if you watched my how to read a birth chart video. I'm sure I've gone over this a few times now. I'll post a little image of the opposite signs right here. The sister signs also is what people call them. As you can see, that Leo is opposite to Aquarius. And so if the sun rules Leo, which is its domicile, that would mean that the sun is in its detriment in Aquarius. So if you want a little ranking, I know we haven't talked about exalted or fall. I will do exalted next and then fall after. It basically goes in mystical astrology mind, how it would go the ranking wise from best to worst, which I know we are very sensitive to the words good and bad or best to worst in the astrological and spiritual community, which I completely understand why, but it's not ranked most harmonious to least harmonious because that would be a different ranking. I just noticed there's Hebrew on Pringles. Sorry. If you would label it from what astrologers say it is the best to worst placement to have, exalted's considered the best, domicile would be next, and then the second worst would be detriment, which is what we're going over right now. And then the worst of the worst would be fall. Don't freak out if you see that you have a bunch of placements and they're fall or detriment. I have quite a few, I must say, placements in their fall or detriment, and I think I'm great. So it's really not a big deal. Now, most people don't, but I do. So it is what it is, you know, especially right now. I'm very happy. So happiness is definitely possible when you have detriment or even when you have fall placements. So don't freak out. Detriment placements are just disharmonious. That's really what the word is, right? Domicile placements are just harmonious. Detriment placements are just naturally disharmonious. Or another word that would be good would be intuitive versus unintuitive. These placements are just a little bit unintuitive in their expression. And that's not always bad. That usually equals somebody that's a little bit more unique, a little bit more creative, a little bit more interesting to get to know, because they're just a little bit different to a lot of people, and the way they operate is very different too. You know, and just because somebody that you know maybe has a bunch of domicile placements doesn't mean they're the perfect person. There's no such thing as a perfect chart. This is just for a learning tool, and I do talk a lot, so let's just get into it, as I probably have already talked your ear off as it is. First up, let's start with the sun. So if the sun rules Leo, then it is in its detriment in Aquarius. So the reason why the sun is considered in its detriment in Aquarius is because the sun is all about me. Me, basically. And what is Aquarius about? Aquarius is about we. us as a whole, how we move as a whole, an ensemble, you know, the greater whole, the greater good, the greater humanity, right? And so having your sun in a placement that is very much not about me, but about we and us is, of course, it's very unintuitive. You know, Leo just is. It just is what it is. It sometimes isn't even aware that that's just what it is, you know, that's who it is. Aquarius is hyper aware of who they are, and they can really obsessively go over it and analyze it and overanalyze what they're acting like and if they should fit into this group or if they should fit into that group. Whereas Leo doesn't really want to fit into any group, it just wants to be itself. You know, some Leos do definitely want to stand out, but I would argue that not all Leos want to stand out, and say the more commonality that they have is that they don't really care what anybody else is doing. They're just going to go ahead and do them, right? Aquarius can really concern itself with what everybody else is doing and how they compare, how they stack up. Also, Aquarius can be made to feel like a weird person, can be made to be outcasted, you know, which is something that's a little bit uncomfortable when it's your personality and your sun being the outcast, being the weirdo, right? But there is something that's really good about Aquarius is that they work well in groups, they work well in teams, right? Which is something that Leo has trouble with. Leo can really be very narrow-sighted and only see their side of things, whereas Aquarius usually has an ability to see the big picture. Now, sometimes they see the big picture too much and they have trouble seeing it from like a smaller point perspective and like a day-to-day perspective, but they are able to zoom out a lot more than Leos would be able to. And with the sun in Aquarius, you can really learn how to be yourself and be strong and, you know, stand your ground in whatever situation, and that can be a really beautiful quality. Sometimes Aquarius can actually even be more confident than Leo. Actually, there's some arguments that Aquariuses have a bigger ego than Leo because it's in a very different way, because they have this sort of God complex, right? Aquarius can kind of go about and look down their nose at everybody, and they're usually also highly intellectual, they're usually very smart. They rule this like genius-like energy, which is a very big positive, very innovative, very quick to pick up on new things, and okay with like the changing of the times, which is really good. Leos can be stubborn and stuck on things, whereas Aquarius can move with the times. And also Leos can sometimes, even though they do want to be a leader, sometimes they can like blindly follow orders or blindly follow what was there before them without really questioning it. And the good thing about Aquarius is that they will always question it. They will always go, why do we do this? Why do we do that? They just won't accept anything at face value. Now, sometimes this can make them the ultimate contrarian, where they just say, you know, the opposite just to go against the grain. But for the most part, it's just because they know that there's something to be learned when you do that. Basically, to not count out the underdog in any situation, which Aquarius can really feel like the underdog. And let's be real, we all like to see a story where the underdog becomes the hero and they come out on top. So there are some good things about being an Aquarius sun. I think the energy in itself can be really lovely and be really interesting and be really unique. And these can definitely be hippies or, you know, alternative people in a lot of ways and much more willing to be a strong individual. But you just have to be careful when you have an Aquarius sun. What I will say personally, maybe this is from my bias and that's okay if it is, I'm telling you it anyways. Sometimes Aquarius will do things just because they're like, oh, I did this before, it was cool, and now it's cool, so now I want nothing to do with it. And they have a tendency to point out people and call them posers, and like I said, be very concerned with what everybody else is doing. Right? A good example is like the genre of goth, right? Aquarius is definitely the person that's going to criticize everybody else and say, you're not as goth as me, you're not as goth as me, you're not as goth as me, you're not goth because you don't listen to this music or this song, or you're not goth because you only dress in black sometimes and you don't wear full makeup every day, and I'm more goth because, you know, at the end of the day, it's like, who cares? Who cares what everyone else is doing? You know, just do your own thing, right? And Aquarius can do that. It does have a big capacity to really just do its own thing, but sometimes it really can get caught up in doing their own thing, but taking it so they make sure they're doing their own thing and no one else is doing my thing, you know, rather than just doing your own thing, you know? And it can kind of be a little bit dehumanizing. And we don't want our sun placement to be a dehumanizing placement intuitively, because that's unintuitive, because we're a human and we want to humanize ourselves. But Aquarius suns can sometimes feel a little bit like robots, a little bit uncomfortable in their own skin, a little bit unsure of what it is to be a human, a person, live in a society, you know, all that kind of stuff. So it can be a little bit of an awkward and uncomfortable placement, but there's a lot of good things to be had from an Aquarius sun. sun as well, but that is why it's a little bit unintuitive, right? It makes sense that it's in its detriment. All right, next up, if the moon rules Cancer and Cancer moon is its domicile, then Capricorn moon is in its detriment because Capricorn is the opposite of Cancer. So I'm sure many of you guys know this by now, but I have a Capricorn moon, so this is my placement as well. And I do find that a lot of people have a much more, I guess I'll say like harder relationship with their Capricorn moon than I definitely do. I definitely have a very positive and I love being a Capricorn moon. I would never want to be any other moon sign. I think it's great. I think we're great. I really like Capricorn moons, but do I still see why it's in its detriment? Absolutely. I totally understand why it is. And that's just basically because it's a little unemotional, right? It's a little bit, it's unintuitive because the moon rules emotions, and Capricorn is very much a sign that keeps a brick wall up over its emotions and can sometimes have struggles communicating its emotions, identifying its emotions. It can be a little bit cold, I think is a good word as well. It can be a little bit cold towards other people's problems. It can be a little bit cold towards its own problems as well, honestly. When you were young and you're a Capricorn moon, you were probably taught to not be emotional and taught that emotions are really bad and really negative. And I know, like, as my own experience being a Capricorn moon, oh, nothing was worse than when I cried. My parents absolutely could not stand that. And I thought the worst offense in the world ever was when somebody would cry. Like I was definitely taught that there's nothing worse than that. And that is definitely very Capricorn moon sentiment. That was definitely something that took me a long, long time to talk myself out of. And there was definitely a long period of time in my like high school years to my early college years where I didn't cry at all. And I was really distant from my emotions. And then I had like years of backup because of the emotions that I had not let myself experience. So that's definitely a big thing with Capricorn moon is burnout. You can be an overworker, but also emotional burnout from ignoring them for so long. It's like a big thing that I find that not a lot of people talk about, but that is definitely a big thing that can come from being a Capricorn moon. Capricorn moons are very much about, you know, success in life, feeling like they are a success and not a failure. And they can have a lot of, you know, insecurities around being a failure or being seen as a failure or not overachieving and succeeding in the way that they want to. So it can be hard because it is very externally focused, right? Our moon should be internally focused intuitively, right? How am I feeling about myself? Am I happy? Am I this? Am I that? Capricorn moon isn't as concerned with, am I happy? Do I, you know, I mean, you can grow into that. I definitely feel like now I'm in a good place and I'm really much more just concerned about if I'm happy or not. But definitely when I was younger, I was not really concerned with how I was feeling. I was more concerned with how I appeared to others as far as my level of success and whether or not I was talented and capable and responsible. That was definitely like the number one thing. And it was a very externally focused moon placement, right? It's very externally focused, which is kind of like how the sun has trouble in Aquarius because it's so like externally focused. The sun and the moon should be personal. They're our most personal planets, right? So having an externally focused sun or moon is of course unintuitive, and of course it would be in its detriment, right? You know, you do have to mature from a young age, and you don't really get to be a fun little kid that a lot of people get to be. You have a lot of responsibilities and expectations placed upon you from a young age, which is why it's in its detriment. Cancer moons are definitely allowed to be the kid or the baby in a very well aspected Cancer moon. They're very nurtured and taken care of. Capricorn moon definitely didn't experience that. On an extreme case, this could be a feeling that your parents never really loved you. I definitely felt like my parents really loved me, and that was not my experience, but I found with a lot of Capricorn moons that can definitely be their experience, and nobody wants to grow up feeling like their parents didn't love them or they didn't have love around them, and Capricorn moon can definitely grow up feeling that way. Though I will say my parents' love definitely relied on how well I was doing, my success. If I was accomplishing all and more that I should accomplish, I definitely felt like if I didn't accomplish enough, my parents' love would be taken away. So it is a very conditional love. It can feel that way, even if it's not. It can come across that way to the child. So that is something, you know, why it's in its detriment. This can be a very pessimistic moon, which is why I said that's probably why my interpretations seem a little bit more negative. Of course, we're going to say, Capricorn moons are always going to say we're realists, not pessimists. But, you know, as I've grown older, I would say I probably am more of a pessimist if I'm just being honest with myself. Capricorn moon, like I said, you have to grow up quickly. You don't get to have that like fun childhood. I definitely somewhat got a fun childhood, but also was insanely busy as a kid. I'm sure a lot of Capricorn moons experience this. I especially started working from a very young age. You know, I think assisting a parent at their job is a very common theme for a Capricorn moon. Definitely did that, and definitely a lot of Capricorn moons I know did that as well. That's the thing about Capricorn moon, is that you can really enjoy work. I know when I was a kid, I just couldn't wait till I turned 16 and could work, which is an insane concept, but it just sounded a lot easier than schooling because you got to like actually do something you wanted to do. But I guess that's true for me now. I would much rather be doing this than going to school. So I wasn't completely off as a Capricorn moon child. I could go on and on about Capricorn moon. I have to. Holy shit, there's a giant fucking like dust tornado. Hell no, I'm not letting you out there. My dogs think they're going outside. It's obviously unintuitive because, you know, the moon is emotions and Capricorn is unemotional. It can be a little bit cold. It can be reserved. I think seclusion does come with Capricorn moon. Like the concept of dying alone is definitely big with Capricorn moon. And they really can put their work above their personal life and their accomplishments above their family in the worst of cases. Now, I will say I do think that Capricorn moon creates a really big responsibility and duty they feel to their family. So that's something to note. It's just a little bit, the way they care and show that support is just a little bit unintuitive or a little bit different than emotional support. It's more of a practical support, right? My mom was a Capricorn moon and I'm one, and she was very much there for me practically my whole life until she passed when I was 23. Also, side note, I have noticed that a lot of people with Capricorn moons experience a parent, especially their mother, passing at a decently young age. I've noticed that quite often, actually. Also, it wouldn't surprise me if you're a Capricorn moon and you had to like parent yourself. You know, that's another big theme. But I could talk about this for ages, and we have so many more placements to talk about, so I gotta keep moving on, man. Next up, Mercury. So Mercury is dual ruled. It's ruled by Gemini and it's ruled by Virgo, okay? And so the detriment of that, the opposite to that, would be Sagittarius is opposite to Gemini and Pisces is opposite to Virgo. So let's talk about first why Mercury in Sagittarius is in its detriment. Mercury in Sagittarius is hard to pin down. It's all over the place. Its mind is all over the place. Sagittarius Mercury has trouble concentrating. It has trouble seeing the small details, and it only focuses on the big picture. And Mercury is all about the small details. And Mercury in Sagittarius can say really big claims and make really big promises that they struggle to follow through on. Also, Mercury in Sagittarius can have a bunch of hobbies and just start them and get really into them one week and then completely drop it and never go back to it. It can definitely be like a hobby graveyard kind of Mercury. Also, people don't like about Mercury in Sagittarius is that they can be very offensive in their speech. That's like my favorite part about Mercury in Sagittarius is how offensive they are with their speech, but that of course is inappropriate a lot of times. They can say the wrong thing at the wrong time. They can make a joke that they think is funny, but you know, at the detriment or cost of somebody else, or they can really just be offensive accidentally or purposefully. Both are true. You know, maybe there's even a fine line of whether it meant to be one or the other, who knows? And Mercury in Sagittarius, it's just really hard for these people to focus, right? Gemini and Virgo can focus for different reasons, and they're really good at the small details. You know, even like Gemini Mercury is good like with small details in craftsmanship. Right? Mercury in Sagittarius struggles a lot with small details and actually making things happen, actually following through on the things that they say, being able, like if they say they have this grand idea for a project, which they do many, many, many times, they have struggles actually sitting down and doing the planning and the sourcing and the, you know, just like putting it all together, right? They have a lot of troubles with that. They can already be on to the next thing. And so there can be a lot of unfinished projects and unfinished ideas. This is a very, however, motivational Mercury. These people can be huge motivational speakers. They can be very commanding in their speech and get a lot of people to listen to them and a lot of people on their side. They are very charming. They are pretty good schmoozers. They can say kind of wild, offbeat things, which is really interesting. And they just have a very unique way of going about their life, which all of these energies will. All of these energies in their detriment have a unique way of going about life for one reason or another. And Mercury in Sagittarius is definitely no exclusion. All right, I gotta keep it moving. So let me go on to Mercury in Pisces. I'm trying to remind myself, these are not comprehensive descriptions, Shaina. These are just talking about, you know, the reason why they're in their detriment, you know? I gotta keep reminding myself. If you think I'm missing out on some things, of course I am, you know? So Mercury in Pisces, oof, I definitely see this one as a little bit more in its detriment than I do Sagittarius, and that is my bias, definitely. But I will say that Mercury in Sagittarius, the reason why I don't see it as much in its detriment is because, yes, they have trouble with traditional schooling, but they are really capable of teaching themselves things. And they can be really quick learners, like very, very quick, and really understand really big, broad concepts in a very impressive way at a very young age, right? Mercury in Pisces, you're kind of slow. It's kind of slow. It's like in my world's worst birth chart, I did choose Mercury in Pisces because it is kind of a little bit of a dumb placement. I know that's like so mean to say. I know that's probably like, in my head, that's the meanest thing I've ever said online, is like calling somebody dumb. Like, I don't think there's anything worse. No, that's so mean to say again, but I'm so sorry to say that. But this is not me like humanizing Mercury in Pisces. This is just me like looking at this placement in and of itself, completely pure. It really, really, really has struggles learning, comprehending, understanding any sort of topic, basically, that's not just like art that you get to intuitively make. Like, these are amazing artists, amazing poets, amazing like emotional writers, or they have great emotional understanding, emotional memory, but they have almost 0 to none book smarts, and they honestly don't even have that many street smarts either. Like, Mercury and Sagittarius can have some book smarts, but they definitely have street smarts. Mercury and Pisces, they're just kind of in their own world doing their own thing. Like, Lord even knows, they're just, I think, confused most of the time. Because Mercury and Virgo is such a specific, oh, I can do this and I do that. It's very astute. It's a very good learner. It's very practical in the way it thinks. It's very cut and dried. Mercury and Pisces is a little bit, it's hard to get them to get to the point. I noticed a lot of times with Mercury and Pisces, I once had a boss that had this, and I could always tell, because whenever he would describe us to do anything, it would take him like 20 extra minutes. When I was like, in my head, I'm a Mercury and Capricorn, I'm like, this could be summarized in one sentence. Like, all you're trying to say is like, organize this by color, but what you're really saying is like, so what you have to do is make sure that, we want it to look aesthetic. We want it to look, pleasing to the eye for the customer. And so how you do that, sometimes people do that by style, but we like to do it by hue, right? And it's just like, who cares, right? Who cares about all this mumbo jumbo? Just tell me to organize it by color because it looks good, But Mercury and Pisces, that's why they're such good poets, right? Like, I never understood poetry. I will never get it. That will never be the brain that I have. So good for you, Mercury and Pisces. You are very good at poetry, and you're very good at songwriting and that kind of stuff. But it's really hard for Mercury and Pisces to sometimes practically do something with their knowledge or their creativity. If they don't have some kind of Virgo energy supporting it, it can all live, or even just earth energy, Capricorn could help too, even Taurus could too, maybe, but if it's all living up here, how it struggles to get it on paper, it struggles to manifest it struggles to get it in real life, right? That's another thing about, both of these energies, Mercury and Pisces and Mercury and Sagittarius, are really good manifestors. That's a really key word for these energies, both of them. Whereas Gemini and Virgo Mercury doesn't really manifest things, they just do it and they make it happen. Mercury and Sagittarius and Mercury and Pisces can think really big, can think about these big abstract concepts and have really interesting, big, grand conversations and get lost in them. But sometimes they do get lost in them. They get lost in their ideas, they get lost in their thoughts, they get lost in their dreams, they get lost in their what ifs. It's really hard to just do things practically, right? Like Mercury and Pisces a lot of times struggles with planning out their day and doing those things as planned because they don't feel like it, right? They're very driven by what they feel like doing when they feel like doing, and there's no reason to work against that when you're Mercury and Pisces. You just have to go with your flow, okay, when you're Mercury and Pisces. You can have pity parties sometimes with Mercury and Pisces. It's just kind of confusing. It's just kind of like getting lost, getting confused, just like a really big theme of Mercury and Pisces. But they do have an absolute artistic gift that no other Mercury sign has, not even Mercury and Sagittarius. So that's what is special for them. All right, so next up we have Venus. So Venus is ruled by Taurus and Libra. So its opposite or detriment placements are Scorpio and Aries. Okay, we'll start with talking about Venus in Aries, I guess. I arbitrarily decided. So Venus in Aries, it's just like really easy to understand like why it's unintuitive. I don't know if you noticed, but Aries and Scorpio, what do they both rule? They both rule Mars. They both co-rule Mars. And so what is Mars in its detriment in? The opposite of Aries and Scorpio is Taurus and Libra. And what does Taurus and Libra, what planet rules them? Venus, right? So Venus and Mars, they're opposites. What's in their domicile and what's in their detriment, it talks to each other, right? Aries and Scorpio is in its detriment in Venus, but it's in its domicile in Mars, and vice versa for Taurus and Libra. All of these energies, intuitively, it's a little bit backwards, right? How can your feminine side be ruled by your masculine side? Or how can your masculine side be ruled by your feminine side? It just doesn't really make any sense. It's a little bit unintuitive. Now, does that mean it's bad? No. It's sometimes really cool to have a mix of masculine and feminine, or, be a female with a strong masculine side, or be a man with a strong feminine side. Like, I think everybody likes to see that, and it's really interesting, and it creates an interesting, intriguing person. But is that easy for the native? Probably not. Probably no. They probably struggled with it quite a bit. They probably feel a little bit uncomfortable in their own skin. This is true for all the detriment placements of Venus and Mars. They just feel a little bit uncomfortable in your own skin, especially, for example, if you're like a female with Venus and Aries, or a male with Mars and Libra. That's going to feel extra uncomfortable. So I don't mean to clump these all together, but if you're a female with Venus and Aries, your feminine side is now being shown through a masculine lens, and you feel a little bit like you may be too masculine, or you have too masculine of qualities, or you're not girly enough for a lot of people, or maybe you genuinely do get along with guys better, or you're a lesbian, or whatever it might be. So it makes sense that there's that discomfort there. Venus and Aries it treats love like sex, basically. And what I mean by that is, in sex, you're all about going after somebody and, getting what you want, and I want this, and, I'm going to reach the pinnacle of it. And so with Venus and Aries, it can have that kind of mentality towards love. It can have some selfish tendencies in love, because it's like, I want to get this love. I need this love is mine, and that's, normally we want to approach love with harmony and peace and trying to find cooperation. Venus and Aries may struggle to do that. I was actually raised by two Venus and Aries. Both my parents are Venus and Aries, and they were definitely a lot more independent in love than a lot of other parents. And in some ways, I thought it was cool, because I felt like they still had their own lives, and, they had their own friends. And I was like, that's cool that I am able to like see my parents, not just as parents, but as also like people. And I definitely felt like their Venus and Aries did that. However, in a little bit of a more negative way, they were sometimes a little bit too independent of each other, I would have to say. Like, they could go long times without seeing each other. They had separate rooms, which is a really weird thing. As I grow up, I realized that like most parents don't have separate rooms, but like growing up, that's all I knew. And it's definitely a very Venus and Aries thing to have separate rooms, because they were just like, oh, well, we're on independent schedules and we work at different times, and so this is what's practical. But that's kind of missing that love. In love, you sacrifice for love, and Venus and Aries might kind of struggle to sacrifice their own personal needs and wants for love. So it's cool in that it is a very independent person who doesn't need no man. Most of the time, Venus and Aries is very independent and very strong-willed, and is very bold, especially in the way that they dress and in the way that they go after what they want. And they're not afraid to approach somebody and say, I like you, you're attractive, which Venus and Libra and Venus and Taurus can be very scared to approach somebody and tell them that they're attractive. They usually wait for the other person to say something first or do something first. So in that way, Venus and Aries is a really cool energy, because it can be bold. It can go up to a person and it can approach them and say, I want you. It struggles to sacrifice anything or compromise anything for love, truly. It can be a little bit selfish in its desires. But at the end of the day, it is just a little bit weird to have your Venus expressed through a masculine Mars sign, like Aries. It can be a little bit like ooga booga, I like you, ooga booga, I don't, in love, And so it can be a little bit of an awkward placement, especially if you're a female. If you're a male, it might be a little bit more accepted, actually, because it's like, oh yeah, you're just fully masculine, that's so cool, whatever, So now let's talk about Venus and Scorpio. So these people are similar to Venus and Taurus in that they're very possessive and that they're very obsessed and infatuated with love. But in Venus and Scorpio, it can sometimes be a little bit all-consuming and overwhelming. And also, I think the main reason why Venus and Scorpio is in its detriment is that when you have a Venus and Scorpio, it's a little bit of a promise that love is traumatic. That love can be traumatic, that there's more of an implication towards toxic relationships. Now, will there always be toxic relationships? No. But will you probably experience this when you're young? Probably. This will probably be more when you're young. There will be really high highs and really low lows in relationship. I think also where Venus in Aries is hyper independent, Venus in Scorpio can be hyper codependent, like really, really bad. And it's not just that they don't want to be single. It's not as simple as that. Because with Venus in Libra and Venus in Taurus, I do find that they just don't want to be single a lot of times. With Venus in Scorpio, they specifically don't want to leave their first love. They can have a strong attachment to that. Even like the first person that they had sex with, even if they don't like that person, they will still feel an obligation towards them. They can really hang on to love. They can hang on to past loves. Past loves can go on past their expiration date a little bit. They can have on and off relationships. You know, there can just be a lot of toxicity within their relationships, especially at a young age. But in general, they're very intense partners. Even if you have a healthy relationship with the Venus and Scorpio, it's very intense and they're very demanding. They're very paranoid in love too. And they read these really small undertones and they make a lot of it sometimes. There's big chances that they were cheated on in the past or they were cheaters in the past. Like it goes both ways with Venus and Scorpio. They can even like paranoid is a really good word for Venus and Scorpio. They always feel like something's going to go wrong in their relationship, or they can be very fearful of like, what if I lose this person? There can be losses, like there can be like an extreme love with somebody and losing that person, and that could be really hard on them as well. Maybe there was no toxicity in the relationship, but there was a loss of that person and they were never able to recover from that, you know? It's a very attractive position though. It's incredibly alluring, and there is something very potent about it. I mean, I would know. I'm with the Venus and Scorpio, right? They are very complicated and they can make something out of nothing, you know? And that is something I experience with my partner, but also it's the most rewarding relationship I think I could ever be in. And the fact that I knew about astrology and saw that Venus was in Scorpio, you know, I knew to not get involved in the relationship unless I was absolutely 100% serious. And that is why I got involved with it. And he has been a lot more serious and a lot more expressive in his affection than I think a lot of other guys or people in relationships would be. You can feel very secure when you're in a healthy relationship with one because they don't just pick people just to pick them, right? They are very serious about the people that they choose their long-term relationships for, and that can make you feel very special as somebody with them. And it can be something very special and very potent and very unlike a lot of the other Venus placements.
Also, a huge note as to why Scorpio Venus is in its detriment is because Venus in Taurus usually shows having a lot of luxuries, whereas Venus in Scorpio usually shows going without those luxuries, right? These are people, I've literally known these people to like not have beds. Their parents not allow them to have beds. They have to sleep on the floor. They just don't have food. They have to scramble to eat food. Like, you don't have those simple luxuries that Venus and Taurus gives you. So on a serious note, that is a really, really hard part that some Venus and Scorpios have to go through.
Mars. I kind of touched on Mars a little bit in the beginning of the Venus section. So if you have Mars and Taurus and Libra and you like skip to this placement, I would honestly recommend going back and just watching the first like maybe 3 minutes of the Venus section, because I touched on it because the placements that rule Mars are Aries and Scorpio, which are the placements in its detriment in Venus, and the placements that are in its detriment in Mars are the placements that rule Venus. So Taurus and Libra are in its detriment in Mars. So as I mentioned in the Venus section, there's just this feeling when you have your Mars, especially in Libra. Let's talk about Libra first. This is a hyper feminine sign. This actually, I have this one as well. I knew I had quite a few detriment and fall placements. You'll keep hearing me say this. And I know quite a lot of people with these placements. I have Mars in Libra, and it is very unintuitive. However, a lot of times Mars in Libra gets pegged for being very passive aggressive. And I will say it can be. I'm not going to sit here and say it's not, because it can be. But I think passive aggressive is a little bit too aggressive of a term for Mars and Libra sometimes. It sometimes really just is passive. And if it's anything, it's condescending. You know, somebody said that, Bubbles said that, if you're watching this. She said that in my comment section on TikTok, and I haven't been able to get past how I do think that condescending for Mars and Libra is a better word than passive aggressive. Even like experiencing Mars and Libra, they will talk down to you when you're doing something stupid, and they their defense, even like I'm thinking about people that I know with Mars and Libra, because I know quite a few people with this placement, even like older people or whatever it might be with this placement, and they can be very much like, yeah, that's what I did. Okay, yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, okay, because that would make sense. You know, and that's not like passive aggressive, that's just like being a cunt and being condescending. And males have this placement, they act like cunts too, so like don't think that this is like that's like an offensive term for females, okay? Men can be cunts too. And Mars and Libra, they definitely are, you know, but they can have that kind of tone to them, you know, and if they are being passive aggressive, they're more just not bringing it up. They're not saying anything. And in that way, they're being completely passive. Mars is in its detriment in Libra because, you know, Mars is all about conflict and Libra is all about compromise. And so when you have a Mars in Libra, you're constantly feeling like you're always having to compromise. I am very scared of confrontation. Not really with my partner, which is probably a Mars and Libra thing. I think that with Mars and Libra, you're the most confrontational with your partners or the people that you are closest to. And that's kind of Libra because Libra's your partner, right? So you get the most angry you get is with your partner. And when you were growing up, you probably saw a lot of anger between your parents or a lot of fighting between your parents. And so you kind of in turn can wind up in relationships that there's a lot of fighting, there's a lot of aggression, there's a lot of bickering. I definitely had an old roommate that it was like constant bickering day in and day out. And there was a point where I was like, I can't believe I've been living with this person for so long when we act like this to each other. Like, it's exhausting, right? That's very Mars and Libra. However, I have literally before in my life ran from confrontation from random people, like a person that I don't really know. Somebody ran over my foot with their car. I was a pedestrian and they ran over my whole ass foot. Instead of confronting them, I literally would just run from them every time. Even though I was in the right, but that's like a very Mars and Libra way to be, you know? And you can have a lot of trouble arguing. I think that Mars and Libras are really, really bad arguers because they're always putting themselves in other people's shoes and they have a lot of trouble arguing their own side. I'm terrible at arguing my own side. I'm absolutely atrocious at it. And it's not even like Mars and Virgo where I think of what I should have said later on. No, I never think about what I should have said. And I am like, why do I don't even know why I feel like I'm right a lot of the times. And so I just give in and I say, oh, well, I guess I'm wrong. That's a very like Mars and Libra way of doing things. So it is really hard to defend yourself and stand up for yourself a lot of times with Mars and Libra. You can ultimately always feel like you're compromising and conceding to the other person. However, definitely a stereotype of Mars and Libra is that we don't get angry. And the most angry people that I've known have been Mars and Libra, honestly. I think there is a lot of inner frustration. Also, a thing about Mars and Libra that I've noticed is that we can throw tantrums. I think it's like all that built up Mars energy and it just explodes. These can be very angry people. They get the stereotype that they're not. But I rarely ever see that. So, I mean, I'm sure there are some Mars and Libra, if it's like intercepted or retrograde, that's going to play out more like the cliche Mars and Libra that's just very passive and docile. But I definitely wouldn't call myself somebody that's docile, you know. But I can in a lot of other situations, like there are a lot of arguments that I don't get into and I don't get involved in. And I do feel uncomfortable around other people that are arguing. And when I'm around people that are arguing, I feel like I'm a part of the argument and I feel very nervous, and it definitely makes me feel like a Mars and Libra. Like I'm like, oh, I want this argument to stop. Oh, I'm definitely trying to like kind of diffuse the situation. Like I'm always trying to diffuse the situation. When somebody's yelling at me, my response is usually to just go, okay, and then just like do what I want to do anyways, which I think is a very Mars and Libra thing. I'm like, why fight them because it's not going to do anything. So just say, I guess this is pretty passive aggressive. So just say, okay, and then do what I want to do anyways. That's definitely always been my tactic. Also, Mars and Libra can be indecisive when it comes to setting goals. They can and ah and go back and forth on things sometimes, but I don't think they're as bad as Mars and Taurus. The reason why I think Mars and Taurus is in its detriment is because, you know, Taurus is a little bit lackadaisical. I'm not going to say lazy because they're not lazy, they're lackadaisical. Mars and Taurus, I think, especially has trouble with goal setting and sticking with it. And sticking with a goal that is best for them. They might just kind of go for the goal that they decided with when they were young, whether they like it or not. It can be really hard to get a Mars and Taurus up and off its ass. And definitely Mars and Taurus can be known for sticking with an opinion just because it's what they stuck with, even if they don't, and just because it's what they initially argued, even when they know they're wrong. Mars and Taurus is one of like the number one energies to be like, oh, I fully knew I was wrong in this argument, and they did too, but I just stuck with it anyways. Mars and Libra, I actually think does the absolute opposite. They're the quickest to flip the switch and change and say, oh, no, never mind, I was wrong almost too soon. They say that they were wrong too soon sometimes, where Mars and Taurus will absolutely never say they're wrong, never really say they're sorry. They can let a lot of stuff boil. They can be this most stubborn of the stubborn. And even if we're talking, I didn't even talk about sex at all with Mars and Libra or Mars and Taurus. Mars and Libra is in its detriment with sex because it's all about what you want in sex, not about what they want. It can be really hard to know what you want in sex, and they can be easily convinced or easily influenced to do things. And depending on what the rest of your chart looks like, boundaries can really be pushed. If you don't have solid boundaries elsewhere in your chart, you can be talked into doing things that you don't want to do. It's hard to find your own sexual wants and your own sexual desires. You kind of just want what the other person wants, and that's not always the best. Fully, like it's not. Mars and Taurus, I would guess, is a little bit the opposite. They like only want what they want, and it's the same thing every time, and they can be very stubborn. They can't be talked out of it. They are very unexperimental. They do not like trying new things. They just want to stick with what's tried and true. Not even true, it's just they're just tried, so they're just gonna still do it, right? I do think Mars and Taurus isn't that bad, because I do think that I'm always impressed by how Mars and Taurus handles themselves in arguments. They're able to stay calm, cool, and collected during them, whereas Mars and Libra, when they actually really get upset, they can fly off the handle and lose like all sense of self. I notice a lot of times. In Taurus, there's a more grounded nature and there's a more practical nature to when they bring things up and how they bring things up and how they're able to stay calm during an argument. But I do think the main thing as to why Mars and Taurus is in its detriment is, one, because of the lackadaisical quality. It's really hard to get them up and going. They can be really slow to move. They can be really slow to do things, to complete tasks. And number two, they're too stubborn. They don't ever compromise. They don't ever see the other person's side, right? Oh my God. So I've already talked so much. I really should win a talking competition. The person that can talk the most is me. Okay, Jupiter. Jupiter is in its domicile in Sagittarius and Pisces. I put Pisces in parentheses. I consider it more ruling Sagittarius. So I will talk a little bit more about Jupiter in Gemini, because I definitely consider that to be a little bit more of in its detriment. And I will touch on Virgo quickly. Jupiter is all about expansion, right? We were talking about with Mercury in Sagittarius, how Mercury is all about the little details. So it makes sense that if Jupiter is expansion and Gemini is all about the little details, that Jupiter in Gemini is a little bit unintuitive. And Gemini has a lot of trouble looking at the big picture. Now, obviously, I will say any Jupiter placement is good. That's the whole point of Jupiter. So it's not like this Jupiter placement is bad and you have no luck. I would completely disagree with that entirely. However, Jupiter in Gemini can be a little bit small-minded. It can be a little bit inexpansive. It can be a little bit scared to leave its neighborhood or its community. It probably doesn't have as big of a want to travel and explore and open itself up to new ways and new thoughts. Or it can just also be so wishy-washy. Sagittarius can really focus on one thing and get obsessed with it, but Gemini doesn't. Gemini struggles to do that. So it can be a little bit back and forth, and expanding that energy only adds to it more. These people can really feel overwhelmed and burnt out by all the options and all the directions of life. Jupiter in Sagittarius and even in Pisces goes, oh, I love how limitless life is. Jupiter and Gemini can get a little bit overwhelmed and then just kind of like, I'll just stay here. I'll just stay here doing this thing and doing what I know and just keep my eyes down, a little bit. Instead of seeing like two paths or two ways it could go, oh, there's the way that everyone travels and the road less traveled, for example. Jupiter in Gemini sees a tangle of paths and gets overwhelmed and has trouble deciding. It can be a very quick-witted energy, but it can be overwhelmed by that as well. Just basically with Jupiter in Gemini, you have small wins and victories rather than these big lottery wins. But sometimes, as I mentioned with Sagittarius Jupiter, you can win big and lose just as big. Sagittarius Jupiter is the energy of winning the whole lottery and it being gone in a year. Especially, I was thinking about this while editing. Jupiter's cycle is a year. So it makes sense that people who win the lottery lose it in a year's time when their Jupiter probably changes sign or house in their transit chart. And so Jupiter in Gemini has less of a likelihood of these big wins and big losses, which can be good because it's a lack of these really big losses. It's just these little things in your daily life that make it a little bit easier, but you can feel a little bit like you're missing out on some things. But it's not, I don't think it's a bad placement. It can be a little, like I said, small-minded, especially politically. It can just, Sagittarius Jupiter is like putting themselves in a bunch of people's shoes and seeing the big picture. Gemini Jupiter is probably just interested in what satisfies them politically and their small community. And they probably aren't even very like radical, and they probably don't believe in protests or going out and protesting. They probably have no real interest in that. You know what, I was just thinking more about Jupiter and Gemini, and I was like, maybe a part of it is that because Jupiter makes you kind of like overestimate yourself with Jupiter, right? And with Gemini, I think there can be overdoing the more sus parts of Gemini, if that makes sense. Like, you kind of become a little bit more like, oh, I'll just talk them out of it. Oh, I can just use my words. And you might kind of get away a lot of things just by kind of like sliding under what people see. Like, I just feel like there's some, it's like, I think there's some sus energy actually in Jupiter and Gemini that I didn't realize and I didn't cover. Jupiter in Virgo. Now, this is just somebody that's a little bit more fickle or narrow-minded. However, I will say I don't think Jupiter in Virgo is that bad of a placement. It's just not as fun, right? That's why I think it's in its detriment, because you want your Jupiter to be like a fun placement and like explorative and exciting. And this isn't really like that, but it does give good luck as far as like getting your things done in the day-to-day, being very meticulous. You know, like I said, also Gemini and Virgo both rule these small wins. Actually, you know, Jupiter is talking to Mercury in the same way that Mars and Venus is talking to each other, which is really interesting. I guess it would just expand, right? Because, we're realizing this together. Because Saturn is in its detriment in Cancer, but it's good in the moon. And then Aquarius Sun is bad in the sun, but it's good in Uranus, which is the next one. Isn't that interesting? That's the whole point. That's how it's organized. So it starts at Venus and Mars and it goes out. Wow. Probably you already knew that even, and I should have known that. But yeah, I did just figure that out, but we figured it out together. So there's a side note. But anyways, Virgo Jupiter. There's just more of a likelihood to have to do a lot of menial tasks as well, but you might enjoy those menial tasks. You might, kind of get a lot of benefit in the day-to-day and just enjoy life's simple day-to-day things. Maybe you don't demand as much in your life kind of situation. This can expand concern for details and accuracy. It can be a little bit more pessimistic. Like even Gemini Jupiter can be a little bit more pessimistic, but especially Virgo Jupiter is definitely going to lean on the end of pessimistic over optimistic, whereas Sagittarius Jupiter and Pisces Jupiter are overly optimistic. I can just feel like you have to work a little bit harder for your luck with Jupiter and Virgo. It can feel like luck just isn't given to you, like you have to actually do things to be able to get it, which can be sometimes a little bit frustrating that it's not just handed to you, but good and hard work will be rewarded with this energy, which is nice because that's not true with every energy. Not to pop in every 2 seconds, but I think also with Jupiter and Virgo is this can be a placement that can give you a lot of luck as far as being taken care of. Having people do those little things for you, feed you, clothe you, give you a nice home. Like there can be a lot of luck along those lines of things. Saturn. So Saturn is in its domicile in Capricorn and also co-rules Aquarius. So Saturn in Capricorn and Aquarius are in its domicile, and so in its detriment is Saturn in Cancer and also a little bit Saturn in Leo. Cancer Saturn is in its detriment because you're babied. And a lot of times, or it can just equal family struggles as well. Maybe you weren't babied and that's really hard on you and you really wanted to be. Usually I find Saturn in Cancer, it's just like you are scared of problems. You are scared of handling big situations and big responsibility. You don't really want to be able to handle that. You don't want to grow up. You don't want to have to an adult. You don't know how to do those things. It can be a little bit overwhelming. You also could have a fear of being an authority or being your own authority or being in a position of authority with Saturn in Cancer. You need a lot more protection. You aren't really able to handle a lot of the things. You kind of struggle with reality checks. Whenever reality tries to check you, you hide and you run from it. You avoid it and want somebody else to deal with it for you. This is definitely somebody who can wait too long to make a decision and on, go back and forth and live in the past a lot rather than making decisions for the future. Also making decisions that protect you and hide you rather than like boost you up and lift you up in life. You can easily get overwhelmed in the moment when big things come crashing down. You don't know how to deal with it and you don't have the tools to deal with it either. You know how people kind of put on a brave face when they're dealing with a bunch of bullshit? Cancer Saturn really struggles to do that, really struggles to put on that brave face and face the day, face life. They can really just shell up and hole up. And also Saturn in Cancer equals family struggles, family issues, odd family dynamics, heartbreak in the family, all those kinds of things, which nobody actually, really wants to experience. I do think out of all the detriment placements, I'm totally biased because of my Capricorn energy, but I definitely think this is the one that I would want the least out of all of them. I do see Saturn in Cancer, and this is my bias, as like wussies and like, you just want to roll your eyes at them, and they wind up getting protected and sheltered by a lot of people, and other people have to kind of make up for their lack of ability to deal with things, and they're really babied, and they don't know how to throw themselves to the world, and I don't know. But that's my bias, so, but let's move on to Leo Saturn. So Leo Saturn, I feel like, is very obvious as well as to why it's in its detriment, because Saturn is restriction, right? And so when it's in Leo, it restricts your sense of self. It restricts your ability to shine. It restricts your ability to just be who you are, be what you want to be, Barbie girl, you know? It feels like you don't know how to express yourself authentically, and it feels like you aren't allowed to. That was really shunned when you were growing up, and we all just want to be ourselves and be confident about it, right? You know, Saturn and Leo I feel bad for, but they also might kind of shun or try to diminish other people's expression of self as well. These people would probably rather fit in than stand out, and really are scared entirely of standing out. Probably it would make sense to me if these people have like stage fright. This would be like the stage fright energy, fear of public speaking, definitely also Saturn and Leo. I mean, Gemini as well, but the fear of speaking in public because everybody's looking at you, right? And Saturn and Leo doesn't know how to deal with everybody looking at them. Also, I think this placement can give you a lot of pride. Too much pride to admit when you're wrong in a situation. You know, pride getting in your way of solving problems. Oh, I know what I need to do is X, Y, and Z, but because of the Leo Saturn, my pride blinds me and I can't own up to it and step up to it and do those things to admit I'm wrong and go the other direction and do X, Y, and Z because my pride is in the way. These people can be very stubborn and hard-headed when you need to compromise with them. They don't like to compromise, and they don't compromise. It just kind of diminishes the joyful, fun, cheery side of Leo and makes it I think it also gives you a little bit of a fear of being creative, a fear of expressing your creativity, a fear of putting your creativity out there and making things, you know? You can not only want to control how you act, but there can be a want to control how others act and a want for conforming with Saturn and Leo. Next up, Uranus. Uranus rules Aquarius, and so it's in its detriment in Leo. Uranus was last in Leo, and once I say this, you'll completely understand this energy, trust me. It was last in Leo in 1955 to 1962. This is a lot of our baby boomers. I know my parents were both born during this time, and it makes sense as Gen Zs with Uranus and Aquarius struggle to see eye to eye with what we want the world to be with our baby boomer parents, Uranus and Leo. This is very, you know, my way or the highway. Uranus and Aquarius is very collaborative, you know, oh, what do we want as a society? What will make our society better? Of course, the Uranus and Leo generation was the baby boomer generation that gets all the slack for kind of destroying the planet, especially like Uranus and Leo is not going to be environmentally conscious at all. Uranus and Aquarius is going to be very environmentally conscious. Uranus and Leo is going to be much more aware of what it's best for itself and its race, even its group of people, its class. Uranus and Aquarius is what's best for everybody's race, what's best for the underdogs, what's best for the underdogs class, what's best for the minorities, right? Uranus and Leo is going to be all about the majority because it's Leo. It's what's popular, it's what's in, it's what's big. Right? It makes sense that the popularity of rock and roll skyrocketed during Uranus and Leo. Very expressive. You know, I think about these people were a lot of times the people in the 80s that wore the crazy outfits and, you know, were very bold and all that kind of stuff, which also has to do with the Sagittarius energy that was in the sky during that time as well. But they did have Uranus and Leo. So they really want to express themselves, be unabashed and confident in it. Uranus and Aquarius wants to be the head protester and the person that, you know, I created this and I guided the way to this new revolutionary thing. Uranus and Leo doesn't care about that as much. It's more about being its own revolutionary in its own world and revolutionizing themselves and revolutionizing their own personality, right? It is a little bit more of it is a very selfish energy actually, because Uranus is about this greater humanity and Leo is selfish, me, 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 me. So what do I want? What do I get best out of it? I also think it's very Uranus and Leo I felt like that generation was really like, creative things do not have to be censored. Creative things should not be censored, but everything else should be, right? Leo is all about creativity. So it's like everything else in the world needs to be very censored, but creativity should not be. They even have that whole thing of like comics are too sensitive now and they can't say what they want to say. I feel like that is very much a Uranus and Leo thing. Like Creativity is where we're allowed to say and do what we want. Day-to-day life, though, we must follow law and order. You know, it's very much like, I don't want to lead a revolution, but I will fight for my way or the highway, you know? All they care about is getting their American dream satisfied, right? Uranus and Leo is very much the generation that was able to live the American dream. Uranus and Aquarius is all about therapy and, why we are weird and this labels for things, and I have this label and I'm autistic and I have ADHD and I'm bipolar, right? Whereas Uranus and Leo is very much like, none of that stuff exists, right? Don't tell me, don't put me in a box, don't label me whatsoever. I don't have this mental health problem. I don't want to listen to this. PTSD, no such thing, right? That's very like Uranus and Leo. I'm unaffected by these things. I'm a fixed sign. I'm Leo. I'm me. I have too much pride to be put into these labels. Next up, Neptune, and this is a wild one. So if you're still here, that's really cool because I found this really interesting. Neptune is in its domicile in Pisces, so it is in its detriment in Virgo. And what is so interesting is the last time that Neptune was in Virgo was 1928 to 1942, which is almost the exact years of the Great Depression. The Great Depression was from 1929 to 1939. So it took about 1 year for Neptune to fully go into Virgo. And I think it's really interesting. Depression, Virgo. Neptune is all about dreams. And I feel like with Neptune and Virgo, it's like broken dreams. It's like, Neptune and Pisces, these people, Gen Alpha will grow up with these crazy dreams, these crazy fantasies. Just anything comprehensible can exist because of AI, right? Neptune and Virgo during the Great Depression, they were taught the exact opposite. And also I think it's really interesting, a big thing with Neptune and Virgo was the banks. The banks losing their money, the banks not being trustworthy anymore. And, Neptune is that disillusion. It's that breaking of trust. It's dissolving as well. And so it dissolved. I know I'm so America-centric because that's what I know. I'm so sorry if you're from a different country. But I'm such an American. Blame the American school system, right? Basically, it was the dissolving of trusting the banks, right? We used to trust that this very Virgo-like entity. We would trust these government officials, these government entities. We could trust them. We could put our faith in them. But when Neptune went into Virgo, they actually don't know what they're doing. Like they actually could lose our money. They actually aren't to be trusted, right? That's very dissolving that trust of Neptune and Virgo. Also, I think it was interesting how, everybody was desperate for a job. Please give me a job. Please give me a job. Please give me a job. Any job. I just want a job. Very Neptune and Virgo. Like I dream of just having a basic job that does menial tasks. Very Virgo. That is my dream. Whereas Neptune and Pisces would never dream of that. Are you kidding? I talked about that in my last video. Neptune and Pisces, they're not going to do those menial jobs with those menial tasks. They're never going to see any reason to do that at all. They'll have no respect for it. Too much on the other side. Neptune and Virgo, too much the other side. Too much respect for those jobs that you clock in and clock out, that you do these menial tasks. It's very much that generation. With Neptune and Virgo, optimism gave way to poverty and a desperation for basic needs. Of course, Neptune is in its detriment in Virgo because when we last went through it, we went through something called the Great Depression. Like, God, all hope is lost with Neptune and Virgo. With Neptune and Pisces, there's too much hope, With Neptune and Virgo, you focus on the small things and lose sight of the big picture. I also think it's really pertinent that this generation really did not believe in astrology and did not believe in anything unless it was perfectly laid out for them. Like they all kind of believed in the same religion. They all very much lived in very specific sects. I remember even with my grandpa talking about how he, there was the Jewish sect of the neighborhood and they only lived and associated with the Jews of that neighborhood. That's very Neptune and Virgo, very strong lines with the neighborhoods and all that kind of stuff and a fear of dissolving those lines, right? Neptune and Pisces sees no lines. There's no neighborhoods like that really as much anymore. Even with the rise of gentrification, the neighborhoods that used to be like that are now very much not. And everything's kind of melding together, right? With Neptune and Virgo, they were obsessed with keeping these sects, these neighborhoods, and they saw the disillusion of that as they were growing up, There can be honestly, a lack of imagination with this energy. Creative things really need to be controlled and need to be monitored with Neptune and Virgo. It makes sense that the Neptune and Virgo parents had the Uranus and Leo kids and they absolutely hated rock and roll. And the Uranus and Leo kids said, screw you parents, rock and roll. And Neptune and Virgo went, that is so embarrassing. We are seeing the loss of order, the loss of prestige. There's just too much promiscuity, right, with this, you know, Uranus and Leo generation. I thought it was also interesting that Mickey Mouse came out at the exact time of Neptune and Virgo, 1929, the year basically after it started. And for some reason, I can't quite put into words, but I was like, it makes sense. Like, Mickey Mouse is so Neptune and Virgo. There's something so politically correct about it, even though when you watch the old ones, they're very politically incorrect for today's time. They were very politically correct for that time's time, and they were very much like a form of propaganda. There's something about like Disney adults that gives a Neptune and Virgo vibe. It's very kid-friendly. You know what I mean? That's very Neptune and Virgo. Everything's very kid-friendly. Everything's very appropriate. Everything's very fake fun. It's not really that creative. It's just like a fucking mouse. Like, what's really so creative about it? Well, I can't quite put my finger on why I knew Mickey Mouse happened the exact moment that Neptune went into Virgo. It just feels that way. I guess it's like, you know what, on a deeper level, cartoons becoming more of a thing, animation coming more of a thing, right? Neptune is all about creativity, and Virgo is about like making that creativity happen. So it's like cartoons, and that animation is very like Neptune and Virgo thing, if that makes sense. But I've talked your ear off about Neptune and Virgo. Let's move on to the final energy. Let's talk about Pluto. So Pluto is in its domicile in Scorpio. I talked about that last video with the millennials. And Pluto is in its detriment in Taurus. So this is the only placement that I don't know anybody from that generation, but Pluto in Taurus last happened in 1852 to 1883. And the reason why Pluto is in its detriment in Taurus is because it becomes so materialistic, right? It becomes so superficial. It becomes so wealth-based. And I was like, this gives me vibes of the Rockefeller time. Like, I'll bet you Rockefeller and Wall Street all started during this time and gained popularity. And I was absolutely right. The stock exchange was opened on Wall Street while Pluto was in Taurus. I was absolutely right. I'm so good at this. As I mentioned with Pluto and Scorpio, they're all about psychology. The millennials really brought psychology and therapy and why we do the things we do, and depression even, to the forefront. Pluto and Taurus is the opposite of that. Money, 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 money. Money makes the world go around the world, go around the world. Okay, it's very much that. But basically, it transforms how we think about money, how we use money, how money functions in society, all that kind of stuff. This is very much a materialistic placement and not a spiritual placement like Pluto should be. Another big reason why Pluto is in its detriment in Taurus is because Pluto is all about killing something off and creating something great, right? Out with the old, in with the new. And Taurus is the worst of that. Like I mentioned earlier with Mars and Taurus, like Taurus will get stuck on something and stay on it for forever and ever and ever, and will not change, will not destroy, will not redo. Even if everybody's miserable in the situation, they are stuck on this situation, okay? And that is not good for Pluto. Pluto is all about destroying and regenerating and redoing and renewing. Taurus wants the tried, even if it's not true, just the tried and tried. So it's just like this generation was too stubborn, right? They were too stubborn. They weren't in touch with themselves spiritually. They were just all about financial advancement and material advancement. It's also an obsession with money, a focus with money, high highs and low lows. This was a time when the middle class line started to really dissolve, and the wealthy got wealthier and the poor got poorer. This was the time, at least in America, where that split was really showing with the invention of Wall Street. Come on. I also think it's interesting, this is when the end of slavery happened. During this time, Pluto and Taurus is very much like, you know, possessing somebody even, and then the disillusion of possessing somebody no longer existing, but it's still subtly existing with like being an indentured servant and all these other roundabout ways. And also it was like with, you know, once you freed slaves, what do? Where do they go, right? They're a little bit out on their own, and it's a really hard situation to be in. This was also when monopolies first started existing, and there needed to be laws to kind of regulate the monopolies that people have. Lots of new national banking acts were passed to be able to monitor money and monitor the banks so the Great Depression doesn't happen again. What's also interesting is that there's a statue of a golden steer, or like a golden bull, in the middle of the New York Financial District. The New York Financial District really started during this Pluto and Taurus time, and Taurus is the bull. So it makes sense that they honor the bull. They revere this time when people were getting greedy, and Wall Street is all about making the rich richer and the poor poorer. and that is really what Pluto in Taurus does. All right, so that is my whole video about detriment placements in astrology. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you stayed for this long, thank you so much. These are all going to be very long videos, but I hope that you enjoy them. I hope that you find them interesting. If you would like me to interpret your chart, I sell birth chart readings on my website, shainaemily.com. I also have an astrology TikTok that I post nearly every day, and I have a personal Instagram. All right, thank you guys so much for watching. My next video will be the exalted placements in astrology, and yeah, all right, bye.